Why do parents need to prepare their kids to be pulled over by the cops? For black kids to be ready for policing that's not even, though resistance was shown, they still get a beating for being suspicious. Why the mistreated? We all know Trayvon Martin, he was murdered because some guy tried to play the hero. But became a true villain. And not just blacks either. There is too much killing. Just for them to be part of it. To speak of this is really tough. But now is the time to show what's really up. We shouldn't fear police. They should be welcome.
We're dedicating the entire show to Deb Bostic, who will be speaking later. Her mother, she was a soldier with us. Every event that I've ever, we've been doing this a long time. This event is really special to me because it's kind of like a reunion. New York State parole was mandated by the New York State legislature to switch to evidence-based procedures, which statistically across the nation have been found to increase safety in our communities. It's a scheduled program that they're supposed to follow from inception of an inmate entering the reception area of prison, and also to guide them through their rehabilitation process. This is not being used. If you read the news, there were 2 people that were recently released from prison that were in the media here, that were released to the Salvation Army. Correction Law 71A says that the New York State Department of Corrections is supposed to be using the Transitional Accountability Plan. That plan is used to help plan someone's rehabilitation. So my question to you is, why was anyone released to this community being housed at a shelter if they were using those principles? Someone was released to the community on August 11th. August 19th, which is over a week later, he was supposed to report to his parole officer. He didn't show, so that's called absconding. After that happens, what happens when someone doesn't show up, a warrant is to be issued for their retaking because they violated parole. When they don't do that, nothing's done. The warrant wasn't issued until August 27th, according to the press. So why did it take that long for a warrant to even be issued? The other question is, why did the 2 people come in contact? It wasn't because the officer was looking for him. It was a routine traffic stop. And then he tried to run, so they pursued him. So I think if we're going to look at this issue, we need to look at the truth and deal with the truth. It's not just that there's violence in our community, it's that there's violence in our community because the New York State Board of Parole and the Division of Parole with their community officers are not following the law. The law is mandatory in New York State. It was written by the legislators with the use of the word shall. That means they must do this. However, without getting too legal, they have issued rules and regulations that are counter to that directive. And they put the policy in place saying that they may have been prepared. So if these documents aren't used by the Department of Corrections, parole has just issued new rules saying that they don't have to care about that. So I tell you as community members, you need to know about this and you need to ask that question of why isn't the parole board being held accountable? So at this point, we're going to start the movie, Deidre Sinnett's movie, Mark Gizewski, Multiple Injuries, and then we'll convey with more panelists after. Enjoy the show.
In the early 1960s, more than 2,000 women in Europe and Great Britain gave birth to deformed children after taking a drug called thalidomide. It was one of the most horrifying episodes in medical history.
Thalidomide was a drug that was introduced in the late 1950s as a supposedly safe sedative, and they particularly advertised the fact that you couldn't kill yourself with it, and it was basically targeted the barbiturate market, because in those days people that wanted sedatives or sleeping tablets, they were all taking barbiturates, and there were a lot of deaths from barbiturate overdose.
In 1957 it was introduced, and
the reason for morning sickness, as it was believed in the 1950s, was that it was psychosomatic, that women were all excited and hormonal, and they just needed to be calmed down, poor things. And that was what thalidomide was supposed to do. You had to take it between 20 and 42 days after conception. And if you took it around day 20, it would be central brain damage, and almost none of the babies like that survived. And 21 to 22 eye damage, you might be missing one or both eyes, and 23, the ears and the face would be damaged, and 24 and 5 would probably have no arms or very short arms. And around day 30, you might lose the complete set of legs. And through to day 35, and it would maybe just affect your thumbs, and you might have thumbs that look like a fifth finger. But it also damaged the heart and the intestinal system from top to bottom, from the esophagus through to the rectum and anus, and most of those injuries were fatal to the children. And so we think that probably 80% of the children affected died in the womb, or miscarried or stillborn. And we think that probably between 20 and 25,000 were born alive.
I think 50% of those who were actually born alive died within 12 months. But I suspect, and that's the general suspicion, I think, that a large number of them were actually, to put no finer word on it, murdered by their parents, by their doctors, or by their nurses.
Sadly, in Europe and in Britain, we have evidence of many babies having been killed by the doctors and nurses as soon as they were born.
That makes people who survived thalidomide really precious, you know, like really important. And so I was struggling with how do you present this? How do you present it? And luckily, Guy told me about Billy Burton, who you saw in the film. And he is, you know, has a lot of parallel things going on because he also did a lot of time in prison, because he also needed help to straighten out his life. I mean, what you didn't see in that is that Billy Burton is going around and talking to kids about drugs and, you know, like not getting involved in drug trafficking and making his life count. And that's one thing that Mark also said to me. He goes, I want my life to count somehow. And don't we all? And it's a really hard struggle. I really do believe very strongly that if he, even though his situation has improved slightly because he's in a different prison, because he's no longer in the special housing unit, he can be social with people. He doesn't have to be quite so isolated and lonely. And he really is, I think, over the years he's developed a skill of really making himself very friendly. You know, some of us are good at it, some of us aren't. He's very good at it. And trying to win friends, that I think he'll be much happier where he is. But no way, no how is the Department of Corrections ever going to have the will or the capacity to get him the medical attention that he needs.
So Mr. Tweedy, without further ado, all the way here from Yorkshire.
Mark is one of 469 British thalidomide victims alive today. His mother took the drug in England and moved to America. He's an American citizen, but because his mother took the drug in Great Britain, Mark falls under the British Thalidomide Trust. The whole story about thalidomide is a big one. It's the biggest man-made disaster in peacetime history. Bigger than Chernobyl, bigger than Bhopal. It caused the deaths of over 250,000 babies in the womb and in the first year of living. It upsets me greatly to talk about thalidomide. I'm a thalidomide victim. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the lucky ones that was able to go to private boarding schools, build businesses up. It was difficult at the beginning, but I got there in the end. To see people like Billy Burton, who spent 20 years in the Filipino prison for trying to smuggle a bit of marijuana from the Philippines to Australia. And the reason why he did that was nobody could give him a job with his hands. So that was the only way he got there. Unfortunately, he got brought to the airport and he spent 20 years in the prison. And this was a prison not like any other prison in Great Britain or America. He said every month people were getting killed, stabbed, chopped up, thrown down the sewers, and he managed to survive that, and he's the most normal man I've ever met, even more normal than me from Yorkshire. But thalidomide is a big picture. This picture and film about Mark is a small cog in a big wheel. The companies responsible are mainly Grunenthal in Germany, who to this day have never given the British, Canadian, Swedish, Australian, Italian, Brazilian thalidomide victims not 1 cent. The German government have been in collusion with the company since the trial in 1968, and it's still going on today. In the last 3 months, we found out that when a criminal trial was going on in Germany, the Grunenthal was talking to the German government about what can we do, we'll try and give 1.5 billion Deutschmarks to the thalidomide victims. And it's on record today that the civil servants were saying to the German government, you should be talking to Grunenthal because he's a criminal trial. To make it even worse, the Justice Minister of the area, North Rhine-Westphalia, happened to be the senior partner of the law firm defending Grunenthal, who then put his own judge in, and after 2 months the judge said it's not in the public interest, call it off. And then a year later, Grunenthal put 100 million Deutschmarks into a government fund run by the German government that then passed law protecting Grunenthal and making it difficult for me, Mark, Billy Burton, and thalidomide victims around the world to even make a claim against this company. And this is disgusting. The people who should be in court and in jail are Grunenthal and the German government. And don't worry, I'm after them. I've been campaigning for 12 years. The first campaign we did was, could you believe that the British thalidomide victims were paying 40% compensation on our taxes? We were being taxed with 40%. So we got that sorted out. Then I went to the company, the responsible distillers, as Deacon said, it's now Diageo, the biggest drinks company in the world. So we took to them and said, look, you've treated us badly, we need compensation. So after 18 months, we negotiated a $350 million campaign compensation package, which is a long-term financial plan to look after these and Mark's and mine and Billy Burton's. Then I went to Germany in 2008, 38 times in 1 year, to try and help the German thalidomide victims, but they didn't have a clue. They'd been treated so badly they just didn't know how to even campaign or talk or whatever. So we helped them. As a consequence, last year, the German government agreed to give 123 million euros a year to help the German thalidomide victims. Then we came back and thought, well, maybe we better go after our government, so we campaigned against our government. And we got a 3-year pilot scheme worth 26.4 million, so about $45 million. We've just extended that for another 10 years. But now, we're after the people responsible for the whole mess. The whole mess that Mark's in prison now is the German government in Grunenthal. And it's just huge, it's a big disaster. And the campaign I've got to get Mark is difficult because Mark was given the drug in England. He's a British thalidomide victim, but is a US citizen. Billy Burns was easy, he was a British thalidomide victim and a British citizen. So I've got to figure a way to get Mark his Irish passport back, because his mother was Irish, get him to England, get him the right treatment, and maybe we can get a new start for him, because he certainly deserves a new start. I'm going to ask, is there any people that any questions you want to ask me? Any questions?
I came in late, so I didn't see them go, but in terms of the United States victims of the thalidomide, did that, what numbers are you talking about?
Well, the best thing that happened about thalidomide is he had a wonderful woman called Dr. Frances Kelsey, and she was head of the FDA. And she was concerned about the thalidomide drug. Going back to 1957, there was a company called Smith, Kline and French that were asked by Grunenthal to look at the drug, and they did a test on 800 women, and 3 of them gave birth with deformities to thalidomide, and then said they gave it back to Grunenthal, we're not interested. They kept that quiet, so then they went to another company called Richardson Merrill's, a US company, and Dr. Frances Kelsey was concerned about the thalidomide drug because she learnt in the British Medical Journal about the thyroid gland, and she was worried if the drug can go through the thyroid gland, it can go through the placenta. So she stopped it from being used in America, and she was given the highest award by J.F. Kennedy, the Congressional Medal of Order, for not allowing the drug to be used. However, there are thalidomide victims in America who, in the early days, doctors would be given a drug by the Grunital and then give it out like a trial basis, but it was never allowed in America. Any other questions? Thank you. Go on. Don't be shy. Get stuck in.
How many people do you feel there are in the United States that are affected?
It's a funny thing. I'll tell you why that's a funny thing. When I was campaigning in Parliament in Great Britain, I met a British MP and he said, I went to university in America and there was 2 thalidomide victims living down the street. I thought, bloody hell, everywhere they go, because thalidomide can look like a lot of other disabilities. So people think down every street there's a thalidomide victim. I would suspect in America there's probably about half a dozen British thalidomide victims that choose to live in America. Mark was born here. But I know there's about 6 or 7 British thalidomide victims that live in America. And there may be about another 20 or 30 out there that's just fallen through the net.
Well, the reason I asked is because one of my best friends, who is an American citizen, born here, is a victim. She only has part of one arm.
I'd like to meet her. The reason why is, don't forget, Thalidomide was a German-made company. And back in the 50s and 60s, there was an awful lot of British troops in Germany, as well as American troops living out there, where those drugs was just distributed. So I imagine that most of the victims in America that could be here would have been given the drug when they were living in Germany by the mothers.
Well, the victims, do they pass this on to their children?
No.
It's just within them from their mothers.
And the damage was caused between the 25th and 45th day of pregnancy, depending on when you saw the film, depending on when you took the drug, would determine the level of disability by a mother. But the other thing that's interesting is that a lot of victims who were born with no arms in Great Britain and now after 50 years finding themselves disabled, they didn't consider themselves disabled at first because they could use their legs to do everything. But as they get older, they get arthritis in their legs and it makes them can't be as manipulative as they used to be. And that's a problem. That's why we need more money. That's why I'm after the German government, to try and get the money to meet the shortfall to the health needs of British thalidomide victims and for Mark. I mean, Mark shouldn't be in prison. You know, he did some stupid things. It's ridiculous.
Well, we all do stupid things, but we're not necessarily in prison.
And any other question?
How long has Mark been in prison?
I think this time round he's been, is it 5.5 years, Cheryl?
Close to 6 years at this point.
And then has he had turned down some parole and stuff?
He was originally sentenced by plea bargain to 1.5 to 3 years. He's completed that sentence, but he was serving a prior sentence of 6 to life. When he came on the scene, he had no prosthetic leg, so they were confining him in a wheelchair and almost punishing him by not giving him a leg, so he couldn't even walk. He was in a program, which he didn't even know he was entitled to any type of accommodation. So he was in a program called horticulture, where they go on the ground. So their idea was, let's let the little man in the wheelchair go outside. And they left him sitting on the top of the hill because he was at 5 points where it's not handicapped accessible on the ground. So everyone else was down taking care of the grass or doing whatever, and Mark is up in his wheelchair just sitting there. So I started to say, because I have a nursing background, I said, hey Mark, you don't have to just sit there. And that's when everything started. So we started filing the papers asking for accommodation. So that was in the beginning. Now we have all the big ballers that are helping us, and we're litigating, we're suing the Department of Corrections to force them to afford Mark to live as normal as he can in a prison condition, which is not easy for anyone that doesn't have any medical problems. He wasn't given pain medication, which is required. Most of the people that they have deterioration in their limbs and joints, and they're in extreme pain. They wouldn't give him any medication. No leg. He was being forced to use the same brush he showered. A lot of people have some issues with being able to use the bathroom. And when you have, in his case, his arms are so deformed that he has a very difficult time to clean himself. As it got more litigious, once Levine and Blitt filed the American with Disabilities claim, Mark started getting retaliated against. So we got tier 3 tickets, all these tickets. So I'm fighting, I'm the tier 3 ticket queen, so I'm fighting all the tickets. But then what happened in January, one of the guards, and you'll see the photos out at Deaver's table, assaulted Mark. Well, I'll say it properly. Mark alleges that a correctional officer assaulted him. And the Department of Corrections alleges that Mark fell out of his wheelchair. However, I invite you to look at the demonstrative evidence on Deidre's table where it clearly shows the outline of a boot in Mark's chest. What are the barriers to pursuing a medical claim for someone incarcerated? So, John, Cheryl L. He's riding a camel, so you see Mark is very enthusiastic.
I only have a couple of minutes to talk about this, but before I do, I just want to recognize Cheryl and all the work that she does for Mark, and Guy Tweedy and Martin Johnson, who's coming here tomorrow so that he can testify on Monday for Mark in Syracuse. I've never seen anybody like Cheryl. I mean, I've been practicing law for over 40 years, and I have just never seen anybody as an advocate do as much as she has done for Mark over the past time that I've been working with her, which has now been about 8 months. I mean, I'm just amazed at the things that she does and the time that she spends and the letters that she writes. It's not every 3 or 4 days I see another letter that she's written to either the warden of a prison or whoever it is that she can get the ear of to make sure that things are improved for Mark. And it has not been easy for Mark. I mean, Mark, because of his disability, it is almost invited that he gets disrespected in the normal world. But when he is in prison, and I think that Cheryl just mentioned to you some of the things that Mark has to put up with, it's the mentality of some of the correctional officers that even put him at a worse level than anyone of us could ever imagine. Corrections officers, by and large, treat many of the inmates with less than full respect, and when they get around to Mark, because of his disabilities and the need and the inconveniences that they have to go through to make sure Mark is treated at least with some type of appropriate care. It's just another invitation for bad things to happen. And obviously in January, one of those things happened when Mark was dumped out of his wheelchair and stomped on. I'm in the case for one reason. Mark, at that time, after he was stomped on, he recognized that he broke his left elbow, and it was a through-and-through fracture of the elbow, so that the elbow itself was in pieces. And at least 5 points recognized that he had to go to the hospital. And to those of you that aren't familiar with the prison medical care, most prisons have infirmaries. Some have a little bigger infirmaries than others. Some have infirmaries that are well filled with people that know how to give medical care. Some are not. It's almost akin to going to an urgent care place if you have a cold or something like that. But if you have anything more than that, the New York State Department of Corrections has contracts with some of the local hospitals where the prisons are located, and they will actually ship an inmate out to the hospital for care. And at least in Mark's case, after this event happened, even though he was told very firmly by the guards that if you mention how this happened, you're going to basically be dead. Mark was very careful about what he said, but he ended up going to the hospital, and he was treated at the hospital. And the fracture that he had was of a nature that they really couldn't do anything in the hospital. And because of the fact that he was an inmate of a correctional facility, They sent him back to the facility. They gave him a prescription for some pain medication, and they gave him a prescription to see his orthopedic specialist, as soon as possible and within 24 hours. And so the guards took Mark back to 5 Points, and they never gave him any of the medicine that was prescribed. That nobody knows what happened to that, and we will find out in the course of discovery, I'm sure. So nobody knows what happened to the medication, and they never took Mark to the doctors to see an orthopedic specialist. And that, for Mark, is critical, because as you saw, Mark's arms are shortened because of his disability. And as a result, Mark had trouble originally, because of the short arms, getting to his head and cleaning the areas of his body that he needed to clean. And his dominant, really, arm for cleaning himself and taking care of what he needs to take care of is his left arm. That arm now is frozen. It's frozen because the fractures were not repaired, and the arm is now frozen in a position where he cannot bend it. So to the extent that he ever needs to get to his head or the back of his head or in other places on his body and his back and down below, he cannot do that, and he has trouble now using the tools that they give him to do that, which is a major problem for Mark. For the rest of us, you know, that might be a disability and it might be an inconvenience, but for Mark it's much more than an inconvenience. It is really something that is an issue that goes to the very daily living things that he has to do, which he cannot do. So we brought an action in the Court of Claims. Every inmate of any correctional facility in the United States is entitled to care just as you or I, as citizens in the real world. They are entitled to have adequate care and care that is commonplace within the community, within the standard of care. And they are allowed to see the physicians and other care providers that will take care of their issues, whatever those issues are. And as you saw in the film, and as you heard Guy say before, Mark's issues are rather, I'm not going to say rather complex, they are uniquely complex. He has undeveloped bones and joints, he has amputations, he has hip issues, leg issues, feet issues, arm issues, hand issues, shoulder issues. It's even affected his cognitive ability and his ability to think and react to things. And Mark is a very complex patient, and it is very clear that the New York State Corrections Facility and their medical program, as it's set up, is just incapable of caring for Mark. And I think that it was Cheryl that said that first of all, you have to have a will to do something about it and then find a way. There is no will in the correctional facility because they just don't see any people like Mark. Mark is unique. Mark is a special case. I've worked on 1 or 2 other special cases like Mark, and it is amazing that when the medicine becomes complex, how the balls start to get dropped in the corrections facilities throughout the state. Mark had his original event in January at 5 Points. He was then moved to Rome, down in Mohawk, then up to Dannemora and Clinton, and finally Senadon, where he is now. And finally, after Cheryl's unceasing letters to the people in charge of these facilities, they were able to, now there is some real progress being made, but the progress that's made really cannot provide adequate care for Mark. It just cannot. And that's what Monday's hearing is all about. And again, it is great that Guy Tweedy and Dr. Johnson come all the way from England and the Thalidomide Trust to lend their support. So we are bringing an action in the Court of Claims. We are a believer in the individual rights of people. That is my job. What does that say? Stop? So I'm getting the hook. But we are in the Court of Claims. We brought an action. That action is pending, and we are trying to recover for Mark the monetary damages that were caused by the corrections facility and the malpractice that ensued thereafter, and just the lack of caring altogether. So I'm going to stop now because my time is up, but thank you so much. I'm glad to be a part of this. And
We need to send a message to Mark, because Mark can't watch our film, we can't show him what we've done, but he can hear.